Morning returned with a pale light that slipped through the dripping pines, each branch bowed by last night's rain, each needle beaded with silver. The forest smelled new, washed clean, sharp with sap and stone. Rocky crawled from the bed of leaves where he had slept, his legs stiff, his belly gnawing at itself. He shook his fur, flinging droplets into the air, then stood still, while the echo of the storm faded from his mind. He had survived, but survival had cost him strength. He moved slowly along a slope where the ground gave way to a long seam of rocks, water trickling between them in thin threads. The sky was open here, a soft gray dome without threat, and far down the hill, a narrow ribbon of stream shone like a piece of glass. Rocky paused, listened, and then descended step by careful step. His paws slipped on wet bark. His breath puffed in short bursts, but he kept going. Hunger drove him, and a quiet, stubborn will. By the stream, the world felt gentler. Water ran clear over smooth stones, the sound even and steady, a voice that did not waver. Rocky drank, then lifted his head, ears pricked. Something was different, a scent on the air he had not noticed before. It was dog, but not his own smell, older, deeper threaded with earth and pine and the memory of winters. He stiffened, nose working, eyes wide. The brush across the stream rustled, then parted, and a figure stepped into view. A large gray dog, thick fur tufted at the neck, eyes the color of smoke. He stood broad and still, not crouched to attack, not tense to run. He only watched. Rocky backed a step, then another, ribs tight against his skin, tail low. A softer rustle followed, and a second shape appeared at the gray dog's shoulder. A brown female, lean but strong fur, a warm shade like dry leaves, her eyes bright and calm. She lowered her head in a small nod, not a bow, not submission, only a gesture that said she had seen him, and she meant no harm. The gray dog glanced at her, then back to Rocky, and the silence between them felt less like a trap and more like a question. Rocky swallowed. He did not bark. He did not run. He stood where he was, legs shaking, leather collar heavy and wet against his chest. The gray dog stepped forward, one careful stride at a time, and the female matched him, slightly behind, slightly to the side, as if to show that he led and she guarded. They reached the stream and stopped. The gray dog's nose lifted, tasting Rocky's scent across the water. A long moment passed, then another. The gray dog lowered his head and drank, slow, deliberate, never taking his eyes fully off the pup. The female drank too, then lifted her muzzle and gave a low, steady sound, not a growl, not a whine, something between welcome and warning. Rocky inched closer to the water, lapped once, then twice, his eyes flicking from one stranger to the other. When he looked up again, the gray dog had shifted, no longer square to him now, slightly turned as if opening a door. The female moved in a small half-circle, placing herself where she could see the bank, the trees, the sky. Rocky felt the shape of their intention, the way one feels warmth from a fire. They were not there to chase him off. They were there to see whether he would come. He crossed at the shallowest place, stepping from stone to stone, wobbling, breath held. On the far bank he stood only a few paces from them. The gray dog smelled of rain and bone and the deep shelter of winter dens. The female smelled of grass and milk and the sun on old bark. Up close they seemed larger than anything he had known, not only in size but in presence, as if the forest itself stood behind their shoulders. The female took the first real step. She leaned in, touched his forehead with her nose, and breathed him in. Rocky did not flinch. He closed his eyes for a second, just one heartbeat, and the touch felt like a blanket settling over a shivering body. The gray dog followed, not as gently but not rough. He circled Rocky once, measured him, then stopped, and in his stillness there was an answer. The female turned and moved into the trees. She did not look back. She only went, but her pace was slow enough for small legs to follow. The gray dog remained one more breath watching Rocky, then flicked his ear and went after her. The path they chose was not a trail a human would see. It was a chain of quiet places, dry ground beneath fern stones that would not shift, shadows that hid movement from sky eyes. Rocky hesitated only an instant, then followed his feet, choosing their prints because it felt safe to do so. They led him to a rise where the wind moved soft over moss, and beneath a tangle of roots, a den lay dry and dark. The female ducked inside and returned with a twist of something at her teeth, scraps from an old kill leather, tough and stringy. She placed it at Rocky's paws, then stepped back. He stared, then lowered his head and chewed, blinking hard, the taste harsh and perfect. The gray dog lay down with his chest high and his chin on his paws, eyes on the trees, a sentinel cut from stone. Rocky ate until the edge of hunger dulled, then stopped. He did not clean the last scrap, he left it there, a clumsy show of respect he did not fully understand. The female nudged the leftover toward him with her nose a small patient push, and he finished. After he drank again from a trickle that ran past the den, then lay down where the ground held warmth, close enough to feel them, not so close that he presumed. The day folded itself into a quieter shape. The forest breathed long and even, like a giant sleeping. The gray dog dozed with one eye open, waking at the slightest flick in the leaves. The female rested and rose and rested again, her movements easy, her attention always half on Rocky, half on the living world around them. When shadows lengthened, she disappeared and returned with a mouthful of grass and a beetle. She did not eat the sort of small food that keeps a small body going. Rocky licked her jaw in thanks, unsure, grateful, a gesture born of memory and need. As evening drew down, a cool wind dropped from the ridge. The stream's voice deepened. A hawk passed high and far, only a stroke of darkness against the fading sky, and Rocky felt his shoulders tense, then ease. He was not alone now. The gray dog shifted to sit against the wind. The female tucked herself on Rocky's other side, not touching, almost touching, sharing heat without demand. Night settled softly. The stars came out, not many, but enough to mark the shape of the mountains. Somewhere a branch cracked, somewhere water fell from rock to rock, a constant, patient sound. Rocky placed his chin on his paws and let his eyes close, and in the closing he felt a space inside him change. The ache of being alone did not vanish, but it lost its sharpest edge. In the dark he dreamed. He dreamed of Ethan's hands and the leather collar and the storm that had tried to break him. He dreamed of walking beside shapes larger than fear. When he woke some small hour later, the gray dog was on his feet listening. The female already faced the other way, ears forward. A fox slipped through the brush downhill, a lean red shadow, and passed without pause. The pair did not chase. They watched until it was gone, then settled again, and Rocky understood something without words. Not every movement was a challenge. Not every passing was a threat. A leader saves his strength. A mother saves her warmth. Before dawn, the gray dog rose and stretched. He touched Rocky's shoulder with his nose, a brief wait, not demanding, simply there. The female stood and shook her coat, dew flying off in a silver spray. They started toward the trees and paused. The gray dog looked back. The look was not a command. It was an invitation. Rocky stood. He was still thin. His legs were still unsteady. But he stepped into their path, and this time he did not trail several paces behind. He walked beside the female while the gray dog moved ahead. They traveled to water, to a low meadow where mice tunneled beneath grass, to an old log with grubs in its seams. The gray dog showed where to place a paw, so the log rolled toward him and not away. The female showed how to wait, breath slow, until the mouse made one last careless sound. Rocky tried, failed, tried again, and on the third attempt he caught something small enough to matter. He ate, and there was praise in the way the female bumped his shoulder, in the way the gray dog did not look away. By noon the sun warmed the high backs of the trees and dried the last of the storm from Rocky's fur. He felt lighter, not because he had eaten much, but because a weight he could not name had shifted. He did not belong to these dogs the way a pup belongs to parents. He was not theirs. They were not his. Yet the space between them held a kind of shelter, a borrowed roof, a circle of watchful eyes. When afternoon shadows stretched thin, they returned to the den. Rocky lay at the mouth of it, half in light, half in shade. The gray dog settled where he could see the slope and the stream, a stone against the current. The female curled in a crescent tail over nose, then lifted her head and looked at the leather collar. She sniffed it, then touched it with a careful paw, not to take it, not to remove it, only to acknowledge it. After a moment she put her head down. Evening turned the world to amber. The wind carried the faintest smell of smoke from far away, a human place he could not see. Rocky's ears turned, then settled. The gray dog's eyes narrowed, calculating distance, time, risk, and for now finding nothing that pressed upon them. The female sighed, a long, even sound, and sleep gathered in the quiet places. Rocky closed his eyes. He did not forget the roadside, the truck, the hands that tossed him, the storm that nearly took him. He remembered all of it, but memory no longer burned. It glowed steady, a small fire that warmed and warned. Between his ribs a new rhythm took hold, slower, stronger. He had found a place to rest without surrender, a place to learn without fear. When the first star appeared, he lifted his head and looked at it. He did not know what it was, only that it stood above the mountains like a marker, a point to steer by even from the ground. He lowered his head again and let sleep come, and for the first time since the boy's arms had left him, Dawn felt closer than danger. He would grow here. He would listen. He would follow and then learn to lead. The forest would teach and test, and the pair who had found him would open paths he could not yet imagine. But on this night, after rain and hunger and fear, the lesson was simple. You are not a shadow. You are not a mistake. You are a life that endures. And in the hush beneath the roots, between a guardian's steady breath and a mother's patient warmth, the little dog who would be Rocky slept like a promise kept. Days turned into weeks, and under the watchful eyes of the gray male and the brown female, Rocky began to change. The pup who once trembled at every sound was still small, still thin, but each sunrise left its mark on him. His legs grew steadier, his eyes sharper, and his movements less clumsy. The forest was still immense, still full of threats, but he was no longer facing it alone. The gray dog, silent and stern, carried himself like the forest itself, unyielding and ancient. He did not offer warmth, but his presence was strength, a wall between danger and the fragile pup. The female was different. She was patient, her gaze softer, her movements deliberate. Where the gray dog showed the path, she slowed her pace, nudged Rocky forward, and reminded him he could take each step. Each morning the three of them left the den. They traveled silently, their paws falling on moss and stone without sound. Rocky followed, close ears, pricked eyes, darting from shadow to shadow. The gray dog always moved first, nose to the wind, testing for scents of prey or predator. The female kept an eye on Rocky, circling back whenever he lagged. The lessons began small. One morning the female stopped by a fallen log, her nose pressed against the wood. With a quick strike of her paw, she rolled it just enough for insects and grubs to spill out. She ate none of them. Instead, she stepped back and looked at Rocky. The pup hesitated, then scrambled forward, sniffing the wriggling shapes. His nose wrinkled, but hunger urged him on. He snapped one up, then another, grimacing at the bitter taste, but swallowing anyway. When he finished, the female brushed her muzzle against his cheek, a simple gesture, but one that filled him with pride. The gray dog's lessons were harsher. At the stream he crouched low, his body still as stone, eyes locked on the silver flickers below. Then in a flash he struck his jaws, snapping shut around a fish that writhed and splashed. He dropped it before Rocky, not as a gift, but as a command. Rocky lunged, missed, splashed, and came up empty. He tried again and again until his fur clung to him in heavy sheets. The gray dog never interfered, never offered help, only watched with his cold, smoke-colored eyes. On the fourth try, Rocky caught one small and, squirming, his teeth clamped awkwardly around it. He stumbled back onto the bank, chest heaving but his eyes bright. The gray dog gave no praise, but his silence felt like approval. There were other lessons, too, ones taught without words. How to freeze when the wind shifted, carrying the scent of cougar or bear. How to crouch low and slip through underbrush without snapping a twig. How to use the cover of shadows, the noise of streams, the shelter of rocks. Rocky absorbed it all, sometimes clumsy, sometimes hesitant, but always watching, always learning. At night they returned to the den beneath the roots. Rocky curled close to the female, her warmth steady against his side. The gray dog lay at the entrance, always facing outward, always listening. Sometimes when the night was quiet, Rocky whimpered in his sleep, dreams of Ethan's arms returning to him. The female would nuzzle him gently, soothing him back into rest. The gray dog never moved, but Rocky often woke to find his eyes open, glowing faintly in the dark, watching over them both. Seasons began to shift. The air grew colder, the trees dropping their leaves in slow showers of red and gold. Prey grew scarcer. The three of them traveled farther, often returning with nothing but tired paws and empty bellies. Rocky grew thinner, but he also grew tougher. Hunger no longer broke him. It sharpened him. He learned to wait, to endure, to strike when the moment was right. One crisp morning, the female led him into a meadow where tall grass swayed. She crouched low, ears forward, eyes fixed. Rocky mirrored her, though his tail twitched nervously. A faint rustle came, a mouse tunneling beneath the grass. The female waited perfectly still. Then with a swift pounce she pinned it, snapping it up in one bite. She did not eat it. She dropped it before Rocky. The pup stared unsure, then lowered himself, ears flat, nose working furiously. He struck clumsily, missing once, twice, before pinning the mouse at last. His teeth found it, and he swallowed quickly, eyes wide. The female gave a soft sound, almost like a hum, and licked his muzzle. Rocky's chest swelled with pride. For the first time he had taken something from the forest with his own strength. The gray dog taught him patience in a different way. One evening they sat together on a ridge, the valley spread out below. A herd of deer moved along the trees, their shadows long in the fading light. Rocky tensed, eager to give chase, but the gray dog pressed a paw against his back, firm and unyielding. Rocky froze. The deer passed slow and graceful, unaware. When they were gone, the gray dog gave a short grunt and Rocky understood. Not every fight was worth the risk. Strength meant knowing when to act and when to wait. Through these days, Rocky grew his legs longer, his chest broader. His eyes no longer looked like those of a lost pup, but of a creature learning its place in the wild. He was not yet strong, not yet fast, but he carried within him the lessons of patience, caution, and courage. One night, lying between the two older dogs, Rocky listened to the forest breathe. The leather collar still clung to his neck, damp and frayed, a reminder of Ethan. He nuzzled it, closing his eyes, and in his heart he whispered, "I'm trying. I'm learning." The female shifted closer, her warmth surrounding him. The gray dog sighed softly, his chest rising and falling like the rhythm of the earth. For the first time, Rocky felt something deeper than survival. He felt belonging. The weeks ahead would test him, would sharpen him further, but the foundation had been laid. He was no longer the abandoned pup crying in the mist. He was a student of the wild, guided by two silent guardians who had given him more than food or shelter. They had given him a chance to become something greater. And though Rocky could not know it yet, the day would come when he would not only follow, but lead. The forest had become familiar, though never gentle. Each ridge, each hollow carried the marks of Rocky's lessons. He had learned where the mice tunneled in the tall grass, where the fish darted quickest in the stream, where the shadows of hawks fell at midday. He had grown not yet into a hunter, not yet into a leader, but into something stronger than the lost pup he once was. One morning the gray dog and the brown female left early, their bodies slipping into the trees without sound. Rocky stirred as they vanished, ears twitching. He waited at the den for a while, pacing, sniffing the ground, his chest tight. They had always returned, but today the silence pressed harder. Hunger gnawed at him sharper than before. The female had fed him, often sharing what she found, but now she was gone. The gray dog, too, his strength like a shield, was not at his side. Rocky was alone. The wind carried scents he did not fully understand. Rabbit, faint and warm, mixed with the sharp tang of fox and something else heavier, the musk of predator. He hesitated, then lifted his head, eyes narrowing. If he waited, hunger would grow until it broke him. If he moved, he might fail, but he might also find life. With a slow breath, he stepped away from the den, paws pressing into the wet earth, nose to the wind. The forest whispered as he walked. Branches swayed, water trickled, leaves fell in soft showers. Rocky followed the rabbit's trail, faint at first, then stronger as he pressed deeper into the underbrush. His belly growled, his legs ached, but his eyes glowed with focus. He crouched lower, copying what the female had shown him, tail still, ears forward. Ahead, the grass parted, and there it was, a rabbit nibbling near a patch of clover, ears twitching, body tense but unaware. Rocky froze. Every muscle in his body trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He crept forward, paw by paw, heart pounding in his chest. Then in a flash he lunged. The rabbit bolted, a blur of gray and white. Rocky chased his paws, striking the earth, breath ragged, eyes locked on the prize. They wove through the grass, around roots, over rocks. Rocky stumbled once, nearly falling, but he pushed harder, closing the gap. At the edge of a small clearing, the rabbit leapt, desperate to escape. Rocky leapt too, jaws snapping, and felt fur between his teeth. They tumbled together, rolling, and when the dust settled, Rocky stood panting, the rabbit limp in his jaws. For a moment he simply stared, chest heaving, unable to believe what he had done. His tail wagged once, twice, then faster. He had hunted alone, and he had won. But the forest was not finished with him. A low growl rolled through the air. Rocky froze, ears swiveling. From the shadows beyond the clearing, a figure emerged, lean and spotted muscles rippling beneath golden fur. A bobcat, eyes, sharp teeth, bared its gaze, fixed on the rabbit, clutched in Rocky's jaws. Rocky's heart slammed against his ribs. The bobcat stepped closer, its tail lashing its body, moving with slow, deadly grace. Rocky backed a step, growling low, his body crouched. He wanted to run, but instinct screamed that turning his back meant death. The bobcat hissed, then leapt forward, swiping with a paw. Rocky darted sideways, the rabbit slipping from his mouth. The bobcat pounced on it, snarling. Something inside Rocky burned. Hunger, pride, the lessons of the gray dog and the female all surged together. He would not surrender. With a sharp bark, Rocky lunged. His small body struck the bobcat's side, not strong enough to topple it, but enough to surprise. The bobcat whipped around, claws slashing, grazing Rocky's shoulder. Pain shot through him, but he stood his ground, growling louder, teeth bared. They circled predator and pup, the rabbit lying between them. The bobcat swiped again, and Rocky dodged his movements, sharper than before, trained by weeks of mimicry and survival. He darted in, snapping at its leg, then retreated before claws could strike. The bobcat hissed, frustrated, its patience thinning. At last it lunged, fully body-stretched claws out. Rocky darted aside and the bobcat landed hard, skidding across the wet earth. Rocky seized the moment, grabbing the rabbit and bolting into the brush. The bobcat roared behind him, crashing after, but Rocky knew the forest better now. He twisted between trees, ducked beneath roots, darted through a stream. The bobcat chased, but its larger body slowed, hampered by the tight spaces. Rocky burst into a hollow chest, heaving, rabbit still clenched in his teeth. He scrambled into a crack between rocks narrow enough that the bobcat could not follow. The predator hissed outside, paw swiping at the entrance, but Rocky held fast, pressed against the stone, growling defiantly. Minutes stretched like hours, but eventually the bobcat gave up, slinking back into the forest. Rocky waited until the sounds faded, then collapsed, trembling, the rabbit still his. His shoulder throbbed where claws had torn his skin, but his eyes burned with victory. He had fought, he had survived, and he had kept what was his. When he returned to the den at dusk, the gray dog and the female were waiting. They sniffed him, smelled the blood, the rabbit, the fear. Rocky dropped the rabbit at their paws, his head high. The female nuzzled him, licking his wound gently. The gray dog stood silent, but his eyes, dark and steady, held something new. Recognition. Rocky curled between them that night, sore, exhausted, but filled with a fire that would not go out. He had hunted, he had fought, he had proven that he could stand alone. And in the quiet dark of the den, as the forest whispered outside, Rocky understood something. He was no longer just the pup they had saved. He was becoming something else, something that could one day lead. Autumn slid over the Rocky Mountains like a slow-turning page, the high ridges catching dawn light in copper and gold, the valleys filling with cool breath and drifting leaf. Rocky moved through that changing world with a different weight. Now his steps measured, his eyes calm, the thin pup replaced by a young dog with a lean strength under his coat. He still walked beside the gray male and the brown female, but not behind them anymore. He matched their pace, then at times set it, testing the edges of what he could carry. Other dogs began to appear at the margins of their days. A pale stray with a torn ear watching from a fern shadow. A black and tan youngster, ribs showing, drawn by the scent of safety. A scarred female, her gait stiff from an old injury, following at a distance that closed a little more each time they passed the same bend in the stream. They were not a pack, not yet only loose threads tugged by hunger and winter and rumor, but Rocky felt the threads tugging at him too. He shared what he could. A mouse caught in the meadow dropped where the torn ear dog could reach it. A mouthful of fish pulled from the cold current and nudged toward the black and tan youngster. The brown female watched these small gifts with warm eyes. The gray male neither approved nor forbade. Rocky understood the message in that stillness. A leader feeds first with patience. Soon the air carried a new scent, a human scent, smoke and oil, and the flat iron taste of tools. The wind brought it down from a ridge road and into the folds of the forest, gathering in the low places like fog. Rocky stood on a rock outcrop at dusk and breathed it in, the fur along his shoulders rising. Somewhere beyond the pines, engines coughed and died, voices rose and fell, laughter sharp as flint. The gray male stepped beside him, face turned to the dark, saying nothing, his silence a single clear bell. We have seen this before. Morning confirmed it. Trucks moved along the dirt road, tires biting into the ruts beds piled with fuel cans and chains and food in bright plastic. Men dragged tape between trees, marked trunks with orange paint, and measured the space where a camp would go. The forest quieted while they worked, birds pulling back, deer edging away, the stream itself sounding wary. Rocky crouched in brush with the brown female and the gray male, the torn ear dog behind them, the black and tan youngster pressed low to the ground, the scarred female lying with her nose to the leaf mold. Rocky felt the old fear stir, then pass. What lived in him now was colder, clearer, not the freeze of terror, but the cool of thought. He looked at the trucks, at the lines of movement, at the food tied high, at the fuel stacked low. He looked at the way the camp was shaped, at the paths that would be cut, at the places where sound would carry and where it would be swallowed. When the men left at dusk to sleep in their trucks, Rocky led the dogs in a slow circle around the outer edge. They did not enter. They read it like a map. Where the wind came from, where the food hung, where the tools waited on tarps. He marked a deadfall, a long castaway, a quiet place where the dogs could gather, and brought them there under a rising moon. The gray male took the high side, the brown female sat at his shoulder, and the others ranged near, eyes catching starlight. Rocky lowered his head and breathed, then stood. He moved a paw in the leaf litter, tracing a line without scratching it, only the slightest shift of texture. He looked at the torn ear dog and flicked his ear toward the ridge, then toward the road. The message carried fast and clean. Noise there, eyes here. He looked at the black and tan youngster and nodded toward the stream. Scent there. Cover here. He turned to the scarred female and bowed his head. Stay with the brown female. Wait and listen. They moved just before midnight, when the mountain cold is deepest and human sleep is thick. Rocky and the gray male ghosted along the camp's dark edge, stepping where pine needles lay deep, where boots had not pressed the soil, where the wind would take their scent up and away. The torn ear dog skirted the road and let out one bark sharp and far. Men stirred, a door opened, voices rose. Then silence again. The decoy had done his work. Rocky reached the tarps. The fuel cans were tied with rope, the food lashed high, the tools neat under a blue cover. He did not bite the cans, did not chew the rope, did not tear blindly. He nudged the edge of a tarp, slid under it with the gray male, and found the knot that held a line of dried meat. He sniffed the knot, then turned his head and pressed his teeth into the rope just above it where the fibers were old and rough. He bit and worried and rolled silent and patient until the rope gave. The meat dropped low enough to nose free. They took only what they could carry without haste, then melted back into the trees. Behind them, the black and tan youngster crossed the stream twice to break scent. The scarred female swept a brush path with her body blurring tracks. The torn ear dog ran a long loop in the opposite direction to paint the night with noise. When the men woke again to a single harsh bark far off, the camp still looked complete, the loss unnoticed. At the deadfall, the brown female divided the meat with clean efficiency. Older dogs first, younger dogs next, Rocky last. He ate little, then pushed his portion to the black and tan youngster and the torn ear dog, and the gray male watched without movement approval, sitting in the steadiness of his gaze. The dogs slept in turns, light and alert, and when dawn grayed the world, they rose and melted away the camp behind them, unaware of what had already changed. The next days became a rhythm. Men marked trees, machines groaned, saws bit into wood trunks, fell with a shudder that ran through the ground like a low drum. Rocky learned the pattern of the shifts, the minutes when one man took a walk to smoke, the seconds when another bent with his back turned, the small windows a wild thing can slip through unseen. He learned the softest trail across the slope, the hollow places where scent settled, the times when the wind shifted toward the road. He did not always take food. Often he only stole attention. A bark from the ridge, silence. A bark from the stream, silence. A shape crossing in full light, only once, then gone. The men lost minutes from their work, then lost focus, then lost certainty. They set out traps, and Rocky marked each with a scent post far away, gathering the dogs and circling the iron teeth without touching them. The brown female led the youngsters through the safe gap once, twice, then again, until their paws knew it like a prayer. When a trap caught a fox near the road, Rocky stood at the brush line and watched the men free it with gloved hands and grumbling voices. He watched the fox run limping into cover. He learned again that not every hand meant death. Then he led the dogs deeper for 2 days, out of sight, out of scent, until the human pattern relaxed. On the third night, a storm rolled down from the passes. Rain fell cold and thin, and the camp let its guard down in the wet. Rocky moved with the gray male through a darkness softened by clouds, circled the far side, and found a plastic tub solved with a twist of teeth and patience. The dogs ate well that night, not in celebration, but in fuel, quiet and steady, like the way the gray male breathed, like the way the brown female groomed a youngster with careful strokes. Slowly the loose threads became a cloth. The torn ear dog started to run the ridge without being told. The black and tan youngster learned to double back and cross his own tracks. The scarred female took watch at the den mouth and never dozed until the second watch arrived. They were still a small band, not a great pack of legend, but they were a thing that could act as one. And in each action, the others began to look to Rocky first. He did not seek it. He accepted it. Leadership settled on him like snow, one flake at a time, until the weight became real. He checked the wind before they moved. He looked last at the camp and first at the youngest paws. He ate after the elders and the thin ones. He slept against the coldest body. When the black and tan youngster hesitated at the stream, Rocky stepped into the current and stood until the youngster stepped too. Then he moved on. One evening, the men packed their tools, early rain threatening again. Engines coughed and roared. Rocky watched from the dark, flanked by the gray male and the brown female. Down the slope, a new truck idled, bed stacked with crated metal. The wind brought a bitter scent, the scent of snares and wire and stronger traps. Rocky felt the forest go still, the quiet turning from rest to warning. The gray male shifted, old scars pulling tight along his shoulder. The brown female leaned into Rocky for a breath, a touch almost like a nod. Rocky stepped from cover and looked once at the camp, then turned away and led the dogs into the trees. He did not run. He threaded the line toward higher ground, toward older stone and thicker root, toward the places where sound breaks and scent swirls. He did not mean to meet strength with foolish courage. He meant to make the forest itself his ally. Behind them the engines faded. Night rose. Wind moved. In a small bowl of land where mushrooms grew thick and water ran under stones, Rocky stopped the band and lifted his head. He let out one long call, not a cry of fear, not a shout of rage, but a steady note that carried down the ravine and up the ridge. A marker, a line in dark air. The torn ear dog answered, then the scarred female, then the black and tan youngster, their voices layering into a single sound that said, "We are here. We see you. We will not break." When the call finished, the forest breathed again. The brown female pressed her muzzle to Rocky's shoulder, her eyes bright in the thin light. The gray male stood as still as granite, his gaze on the place where the sound had fallen away. They would not fight every battle. They would not win every day. But now the dogs had a center. They had a way. Rocky settled beside the brown female and lowered his head to the earth. He felt the leather collar against his throat worn and softened by rain and time, and he let its old promise settle over the new one he had made. Protect the small, move the many, bend the danger. The mountains listened. The river kept its voice. And in the hush between the next two breaths, a leader was no longer a rumor, but a living thing with steady eyes and quiet steps, a dog named Rocky, the forest beneath his feet, and a band of strays at his back, ready to meet whatever the trucks would bring when the sun returned.